All right, should we get started?
Yeah.
All right, well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Elizabeth Nolan Brown. I am one of the co-founders of Feminists for Liberty, along with Kat Murti, and the two of us run this group together. We're really happy to have you guys here with us tonight. We have a great panel lined up. And so to start things off, I'm just going to let the panelists each introduce themselves briefly. Kat, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Liz. So I am Kat Murti. I co-founded Feminists for Liberty alongside Elizabeth Nolan Brown. I'm really glad we're having this discussion. I will say it's a conversation that I do not like to have, at least in public settings. It's something that I think is deeply personal for a lot of people and really should be something that is decided on an individual level. Unfortunately, we don't live in a world in which that is true. A lot of people's personal decisions around this impact other people. And so I will say I'm coming at this from the perspective of being personally pro-life. I think that every abortion is a sad decision, and I would like us to live in a world in which no woman feels that that's a choice that she has to make. But I'm also fiercely pro-choice from a political or a policy perspective for a couple different reasons. From an ideological perspective, it has to do with self-ownership. As long as baby is not able to exist outside of a woman's body, she has ultimate ownership over her body and what happens inside of it. And then also from a practical perspective, that as long as women have been able to make the connection between pregnancy and childbirth, women have been finding ways to end that pregnancy. And for the scope of US history, from the time between Roe v. Wade was passed and the time when it recently was ended, we actually saw the rate of abortion going down. And that's for a number of different reasons, including the fact that it's just a lot easier to be a young, poor, or single mother now than it ever was previously. And so I believe in building a culture of life without the state and without shaming women or making them have to make difficult choices that they most of the time don't want to be making.
Marianne, can you go next?
Sure. Hi, I'm Marianne March. I am a writer and communication strategist in Northern Virginia. I studied economics and public policy administration at Georgia State University, formerly the marketing manager for libertarianism.org. And I got my start in my career as an intern and then an editor at the Foundation for Economic Education. And I am terrified but excited to be here. It's a really hard topic, but it's important now more than ever because for the past 50 years, we've had Roe versus Wade as sort of the freedom from having a coherent argument about this topic. Whether you liked it or not, Roe set a legal framework that restricted states' ability to make abortion illegal, and that framework is now gone. It's a new landscape, and the decisions that we make today could impact people for decades. So it's really important that we get it right, and it's high risk if we get it wrong, because on one hand, we risk the destruction of innocent human life. And on the other hand, we risk the devaluing of women's rights, self-autonomy, and privacy. And then there's a whole sphere of people outside of pregnant women and fetuses who are impacted by potential policy, the privacy rights of everyday Americans who we can imagine would have their privacy rights infringed upon by an intrusive police state if one were to develop based on abortion bans and regulations. And then we're also already seeing a risk to women who are miscarrying, who are seeing their access to potentially life-saving medical treatments and pharmacological drugs limited by physicians and pharmacists who are afraid of running afoul of the law. So the stakes are high, and I look forward to us in the next hour finding a really solid solution. So good luck to us.
Hey everybody, I'm Stephanie Slade. I am, like Elizabeth, a senior editor at Reason Magazine. In 2015, I wrote a piece called "Why I Am a Pro-Life Libertarian" that I think is probably going to forever be the most read thing I've ever written, because there's so much interest in that question, and people are continuing to be interested in it, and they Google for it and they find that article. So that's one of the reasons that I'm interested in this question. I did want to just begin throwing, the one thing I wanted to throw out there to start with was with due respect to the organizers of this event, I think it's of course not true that libertarians are pro-choice on everything except abortion. Libertarians, we're not pro-choice on murder, we're not pro-choice on theft, we're not pro-choice on rape or assault. So the question that we're really grappling with here is whether abortion deserves to be categorized with those activities, those behaviors, or does it deserve to be categorized as something more like drug use or prostitution, where we may disagree about the moral status of that choice, but we generally as libertarians are going to be on the same page that the state should stay out of it. So that's the question: how should it be categorized? Not so much whether pro-choice, and that gets to, I think, probably a recurring theme for many of us, which is that the pro-life, pro-choice labels are often not as helpful as we might like.
Mhm.
I'm gonna go now. Hi, everyone. My name is Izabela Patriota. I am from Brazil. I'm a lawyer. So since law school, I've been debating a lot about abortion and abortion rights and reproductive rights, especially because I'm from a country where abortion is not even illegal. It's a real crime. So you really go to jail no matter where you are. So I know the consequences of this regulation in my country. So I have a lot to share about it. And on the contrary of I think Kat and Stephanie, I see no moral mistakes on this decision. I see no problem on it, no matter the stage of the pregnancy. I really don't see, I see it just like drug use, using the same example that Stephanie used. I just see it as a personal decision that sometimes I can make it and sometimes I cannot make it. So this is my standpoint of view on this in this topic. And just like drug use, I respect everybody's views. So you do, I just follow the very same moral setting on it. If you want to use, you use it. I don't think you're better or worse than me in this regard. So just introducing myself.
Hi, I'm Avens O'Brien. I'm a second generation libertarian activist living in Los Angeles. I'm an entrepreneur, and I do a lot with drug policy. And I actually kind of think of abortion rights kind of in the same vein as drug policy, not just because I agree that it's it's a moral choice that someone can make or not make, but also because nowadays with the technology that we've developed since Roe v. Wade, we now have the capacity to terminate pregnancy in the first 10 weeks of pregnancy with a series of pills. And so as that has now come into the landscape, we're going to be seeing a lot more of the stuff that we've seen, the horrible stuff we've seen with the drug war applied to abortion rights, because we're talking about pills that can be literally just transferred across state lines from legal states to illegal states, the same way that weed is right now. And what we can see is governments coming in and creating a huge privacy and civil liberties issue there, especially because when a woman utilizes an abortion pill, the result is basically indistinguishable from having a miscarriage. And so in states in which abortion is illegal all the way through, we're going to see these problems with women who are having miscarriages and being accused of having abortions, or having abortions, and that being this kind of gray area in terms of the legal consequences. For me, this issue, I come at this as somebody who just believes in a fundamental right to determine what's happening in your own body. And so for me, that's the moral issue. But I also come at it this mostly from a government thing. I don't mind if someone is personally pro-life. I mean, I love babies. I'd like to have some myself someday. I'm very, very pro-life in that I want people to have incredible quality of life, to be able to choose life if that's the choice they want to make. But I do worry that a government with the power to prevent you from having an abortion is a government with the power to compel you and force you to have an abortion. And if we look at countries across the world that have illegal abortion, we see women imprisoned for miscarriages, for making decisions that weren't considered ideal for sustaining a pregnancy, and that affects women, that affects doctors, that affects people who have nothing to do with that situation, but are then denied medical care that they need. So anyway, that's my big thing. And
right.
Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, thanks everyone for those introductions. Tonight we're going to focus on sort of the question of libertarians and abortion. When it comes to libertarians, we oppose state power. We know that prohibition never works. We believe in bodily autonomy. So this should be simple, right? Of course, it's not at all simple. It's a really fraught topic amongst libertarians. And tonight we're going to try to delve into various reasons why. And to illustrate this fraudness, I think we only need to look at the Libertarian Party. Of course, the LP doesn't stand for all libertarians at all, especially maybe these days, but it can be a good indicator of libertarian thought. The original Libertarian Party platform, or at least the party platform in 1974, called for the repeal of all laws restricting voluntary birth control or the right of a woman to make a personal moral choice regarding the termination of pregnancy. And then it was changed later. One of the most recent iterations, it said, recognizing the abortion is a sensitive issue and that people can hold good faith views on all sides. We believe the government should be kept out of the matter, leaving the question to each person for their conscientious consideration. Recently, well, actually, Avens, can you tell us what's been going on with the LP and abortion recently?
Sure. So a pro and a con. At the 2022 Libertarian National Convention, the delegates are people who actually just went to the National Convention, who got elected by their state representative, their state parties to go to the National Convention. So whether or not they represent other libertarians in the party is questionable, but it is what it is. They show up and they represent them in terms of their votes. The delegates who showed up at National decided to remove our abortion plank. And so there is now no statement about abortion itself in the Libertarian Party platform. However, they did add some wonderful phrasing to the healthcare plank. And if you'd like, I can share what the phrasing was, because it applies to abortion without mentioning abortion, which is, they said, we favor a free market healthcare system. Medical facilities, medical providers, and medical products, including drugs, must be freely available in the marketplace without government restrictions or licenses. We recognize the freedom of individuals to determine the level of health insurance they want, if any, the level of healthcare they want, the care providers they want, the medicines and medical and treatments they will use, and all other aspects of their medical care, including end-of-life decisions. People should be free to purchase health insurance across state lines. We oppose governments either mandating or restricting voluntary access to medical treatments or procedures, including vaccines. I think that the people who wrote that were mostly thinking of COVID, vaccination, ivermectin, those kinds of things. But the fact that it applies very nicely to medical abortion was not missed by me. And so I was very happy for that new addition that was added to our plank. But the abortion plank was removed.
One of the things that Slade often says that I think is very important is that libertarianism alone can't tell you how to feel about abortion. Slade, could you maybe elaborate on that?
Yes, this is one of the arguments I made in that piece I mentioned from 2015, which is, how you feel about abortion is probably going to be dependent for most people on whether they think an abortion is an act involving one human being or two human beings. Is it just a woman and a ball of cells or something like that, or is there another human in the womb that's part of that equation? And that is a question of when does life begin? What is personhood? What is a human being? That I don't think that libertarianism itself has anything to contribute to help us answer that question. We have to look to science, we have to look to philosophy, we have to look to many other places in order to come to a sort of answer for ourselves about that. When does life begin, or what is a human person? And once we've done that, then I think you can obviously bring in libertarian philosophy about what is the proper role of the state in society, to try to determine where you go from there. And should there be laws? Should there not be laws? Would a law do more harm than good? Those are all questions that we can debate. But that initial question that's so important, if I believe that there was only one human being there to begin with, then of course I would be pro-choice as well. But that's not what I believe. That's not what I when I look at an ultrasound, I see a human baby. So that requires, that leads me somewhere else once I bring my libertarian beliefs into the equation as well.
I would like to weigh in on this as well, because Slade, I agree with you in part, right? I do think that that is the central question for a lot of people. And I also think that libertarianism really cannot determine the moral question here of whether or not having an abortion is morally acceptable. I think what libertarianism can tell you is that the state should not be part of making that moral decision. However, I'm looking at it from the perspective of I actually don't think it matters whether it's one person or two people. I think it matters whether the person who owns the body actually has ownership. The body with the uterus has ownership of their uterus or not, because there are many other situations that we will find throughout our lives in which you might need to sacrifice some or many aspects of your comfort or even ultimately your own life in order to help someone else survive. And that's really what also part of this question, right? Even if you do believe that it's two people, do you have a moral necessity to make sacrifices on your own part in order to allow another human to survive? And that is something that the state, even if we're going to look at it at that level, does not require people to do in most other situations. We all have two kidneys. We're not required to give up one kidney so that people who are dying on the kidney donor list have another kidney, right? So I think that this is a very deep moral question. I think that there are many moral questions at the center of this, and they're not things that the state or anyone else can decide for us. I think that we're fundamentally going to have different opinions on them, and none of them is necessarily the right libertarian opinion. But it's because of that that we do not want laws deciding what the answer to that moral question should be for anyone, no matter what they end up believing. I do think that there is a space for people to think about this, to talk about this, to try and persuade other people to see it morally the same way that they do. But I don't think that it's fundamentally a question of whether a fetus is a baby or is a human or not. Although I think that that is at the center of the moral question for many people. It's certainly not for all.
Just to clarify, I do think libertarianism has a lot to say about moral questions. It's the factual question of when life begins or what is a human person that I think libertarianism can't help us answer. We have to look elsewhere for the answer to that question. I guess it is probably the case that among libertarians, there are more people who would be willing to say, perhaps, oh yeah, there are two human beings involved and I still think abortion is fine, is no big deal, or the woman should have the right to do whatever she wants because it's her body.
It's no big deal, and there shouldn't be a law, are not the same thing.
In either of those positions, that a person could believe that there are two human beings involved and hold either of those two positions. Among libertarians, I think that's probably more common than among the population at large, for whom I would say I feel pretty confident saying that most people are going to think that the question of whether or not there's a second human being involved is really important to determining what they think about the moral status.
Does anyone else on our panel right now want to weigh in on that, or we can come back to that later too?
I had something to point out.
I thought you might. I saw your face this whole time.
Yes. It's definitely what is going on in a pregnancy. It's definitely a potential human being. We know it because we're all a result of a pregnancy. So it's definitely a potential human being. But when we put these two parts of the equation in the same situation, the potential human being can have the same rights that a full completed human being already has. This is the main question to me. And this fully completed human being must put herself at risk, because we know pregnancy is a risk for the woman, and we're talking about it in the first world. In the first world, it is still a risk for the woman to keep with a pregnancy until the end of it. And I'm from the third world. I'm from a country where women cannot take care really of her pregnancy if women do not have access to birth control, and at the end of the day, they don't have access to good hospitals to have the kid. And sometimes they already have 4 kids and they are very poor because it's a result of poverty. So I always talk not only about the woman that is here, is from the US, has access to everything, but to those women that don't lack access to birth control and good hospitals, or even the means to keep this child to have access to other things like education and everything.
Isabella, I was going to come to you next anyways, because I wanted to ask, I think, as we see, libertarianism may or may not be able to tell us about the moral question here. But what I think libertarianism, we can all agree, definitely can tell us, is about the way that state power often plays out in practice versus, in theory. I think that there are some libertarians who say like, okay, but still, like we should just ban it, and it'll just, then there won't be any more abortion. But we know that, how prohibition has played out in other realms, it doesn't generally work that way. So I was wondering if you could talk about your experience with it being illegal in Brazil, how that plays out there.
Of course. As I said, I am a lawyer. That's why I studied a lot the laws in Brazil regarding abortion. So we have 3 circumstances in which abortion is legal. If it's due to rape, if the woman was raped. The second one is if the woman is at risk. So the doctor should choose the woman. It's what the law says in Brazil. And the third situation is if the baby doesn't have a brain, which is anencephalo. I don't know what happened here, but these are the 3 circumstances in Brazil which women can have a legal abortion. However, what is going on right now in Brazil is that even when the woman is raped and even when they are at risk, they need to face legal procedures to really have access to it. Last year, we had a girl who was raped. She was 11-year-old, and the judge was trying to convince her to keep the pregnancy until the late term, to really deliver the baby. So the decision of the kid and her parents was not being respected. So this is something that we have in Brazil. And not only that, the past president in Brazil approved a law that after someone says that she was raped, they should involve the police, and it should start an investigation. So it would not be private anymore. So we were having situations that people were having their privacy exposed. And not only that, and then we go to the third part of having it as a crime in Brazil. The government is entitled to investigate on your period. If your period is delayed for 3 or 6 months, and we know it happens for different reasons, the government is entitled to ask you why, and you need to give real answers to the government. So this is something. And not only that, and then we have the rape situation, and when it's to kids, which is horrible, but when we are facing an adult who was raped and want to keep it private, and decide to have decide to keep the child, but give it to adoption. And when it comes to public, because you start an investigation, we know that the government can leak it. The society still judged that woman who decided to put the kid to adoption. So it's not really about rights or to protect the children or to protect the unborn. It's a way to judge women and to control their bodies. This is how I read it personally in Brazil, with this control of the government.
Marianne, since we haven't heard from you yet, do you want to, what kind of things do you notice from regulations in the United States that may have been backfiring in states with stricter abortion laws, or what kind of things are you worried about perhaps backfiring?
Yeah, so I took a look at a couple of laws as they're currently written in Texas and in Georgia, and I was distressed to find that within the current Georgia law, which was just upheld by the Georgia Supreme Court as recently as November, I believe, that health records be made available to
Keep going.
health records be made available to the district attorney in the judicial circuit where the abortion either took place or where the pregnant person who had the abortion received their abortion. So we're already seeing privacy implications for people within the United States. Oh, I'm sorry. Apparently turning your phone off didn't work. And then, as I'd mentioned earlier, we're seeing chilling effects on physicians and pharmacists in places like Texas and Georgia, where shortly after Roe versus Wade was overturned, there was a lot of hand-wringing about amongst physicians for what was legal for them to do. So there were miscarrying women who were actively bleeding, who were turned away from their physicians and told to go seek care from an abortion provider because physicians were afraid of running afoul of the law. So we're already seeing impacts on people who are not seeking abortions, as well as privacy implications for people who have.
Yeah, some of the things that I think are perhaps worrying is that with abortion pills being, such a different method of conducting abortions than in previous years, that we're gonna, wind up with very much a war on drugs style, attack on abortion pills that will invade a lot of civil liberties. And also, like you mentioned, the Texas law, and there's a lot of these various laws that are being passed, or at least considered right now, that criminalize aiding and abetting abortion, which tends to really get into like some free speech implications, where even anyone who's counseling or recommending someone or just telling someone about where they can get an abortion out of state or something like that could wind up criminalized as well. I think to go back to some of the things we were, like Kat and Slade were talking about earlier, though, a lot of this illustrates the inadequacy of our pro-choice, pro-life dichotomy, and how that doesn't really capture where a lot of people in the United States are. I mean, in fact, you often see polls where, especially among young people, they'll describe themselves as both pro-choice or pro-life, or people will say they're pro-life, but they think abortion should be illegal up to a certain point, or people will say they're pro-choice, but they actually pretty much think that only means like in cases of, a mother's life being at risk or something like that. So I was wondering if anyone, whoever wants to take it, has some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is a political football that has always been just a really good way to get voters out and to get a whole lot of support around one issue or another. And I think that, even if we look at polling, the vast majority of Americans are not staunchly pro-choice in all situations, or at least pro-abortion in all situations, or anti-abortion in all situations. They fall somewhere in the middle. But what we're kind of led to believe is that you can only choose one or the other. You either think that all abortion is great and we should all be super pro-abortion, or alternately that there is no situation in which this is acceptable, people should go to prison, etc. And I just don't think that that's where most people are. And I think that it's just such a deeply wrought conversation that people aren't having it. But the thing too is that a lot of people have had abortions, and a lot of people who might come out as being against legal abortion have had abortions, and certainly a lot of people have caused abortions and might be even writing or passing these laws, right? So I think that is certainly a concern there, but also as someone who is deeply pro-life from a personal perspective, a lot of this actually can be solved by changing the way that we both laws around things like access to birth control, having better approaches to things like sex education, but also, changing a lot of things like making sure that our work culture makes it a lot easier for people to get, for women to be able to work, for parents to be able to work, that we're changing the culture around what it means to have children, that we have more, more mixed age, a social situation, so that it's not as deeply difficult of a decision for people. And of course, there is also the element that, sometimes something goes horrible and even if that baby were to be born, it wouldn't actually be alive. There's stillbirths, there's things like that. And that's a lot of times what we're talking about when late-term abortions, which is what a lot of people think about when they think about abortion. Those aren't usually wanted babies, right? This wasn't something where someone just decided in their 8th or 9th month, they're going to go, or 7th month even, this is what they're going to do. So I think that there's just so much nuance around this, and there's so much that we could do that would actually be productive in terms of lowering the number of abortions that do happen and doing it in a way without violating people's rights, without, causing bad healthcare, so that we've talked a lot, and I want to let other people speak too, but we've talked a lot about things like lack of access to birth control or poverty or things like that. But another thing that's been happening even in states that have been rolling back abortion legality is that they've also been making it much more difficult for women or men who do not want to have children to be able to choose to voluntarily get sterilized. And that's also a concern, right? Because if you're outlawing abortion, if you're making it difficult to prevent pregnancy, I think that leads to abortions as well, whether or not they're legal, whether or not they're safe. So that's just a part of it, but certainly there's just so much more that we could be talking about and addressing that would be so much more productive than screaming at people from opposite sides of this.
I think Slade wanted to weigh in. Gordon, can you unmute her? We've had to mute everyone because of some troll activity happening.
People really hate when you have these conversations, as you can see.
Yeah. Our other panelists, are you guys, anyone here able to talk? All right, I'm going to go ahead and start asking us another question then as we're waiting on this.
I'm unmuted now. I can just jump in quickly. I wanted to mostly just completely agree with that. I mean, I used to work in the polling industry. I spent a lot of time both looking at polling data on where people come down on abortion and even doing focus groups with people. And you find all kinds of crazy things where, like, we did a focus group with women who self-identify as strongly pro-choice. But when you ask them about like 3rd trimester abortion, they're like, oh my God, no, of course that horrifies me. And then the flip side of that is people who identify as strongly pro-life, but when you introduce a wrinkle into the equation, like if the baby has a disease or a fetal abnormality or something, then they get like, well, really the government shouldn't be involved in those questions. So the terminology really breaks down a lot. A thing I like to point out when I'm talking about this issue, though, because of that, is that although the activists on both sides tend to be at the two extremes, people who do this for a living or write about it or spend a lot of time thinking about it tend to be at one of the two extremes. The vast majority of Americans are not. I mean, they're somewhere in the middle. And that's one of the reasons that I think I sort of went back and forth on whether I thought it was better or worse with the fall of Roe v. Wade and the sort of locus of decision making on abortion going from being more at the national level and more to more at the state level, whether that was a good thing or not. I sort of went back and forth on this. I was ambivalent about it, but I think really because of all the lessons that we see in all these other areas when it comes to the problems with prohibition and the ways that giving state power that can backfire, that bringing it down to a more local level is going to be better than having a decision probably made far away. There are going to be fewer people who are forced to live under a legal regime that goes completely against the things that they believe when it's done at the state level, and probably be better to move it towards an even more local level than that. So that's one of the things that I sort of reluctantly come to, because again, as a pro-lifer, as somebody who believes that there is a human person in the womb during an abortion, part of me just instinctively wants to say, well, no, I mean, our Constitution should protect those human beings. It shouldn't be different in one state from one state to another. But ultimately, I've arrived at the conclusion that it probably is better to move down towards the more local level because of that reality that most people are not where I am. Most people are not where you are, right? Most people are somewhere in the mushy middle, and so we need to have a legal regime that deals with that fact that is not convenient for any of us, but is the reality.
Yeah.
Avens, did you want to jump in?
Yeah. Sorry. Yes. And it's funny. I agree with Slade on some of this, except I don't think that I don't think abortion rights should be determined at a local level, because I think that like local governments can be extremely oppressive. But I understand the argument, and is that better than having a federal ban on abortion? Well, then sure. But for me, one of the things that really disturbs me is the fact that states are not just making it illegal to get an abortion in that state, but also prohibiting seeking ways to prevent women from having abortions in other states. Like that if you leave a state and you do something that's illegal in your state but legal in that state, if you're living in a state where weed is illegal and you go to California and weed is legal here and you smoke weed, you can't get in trouble in whatever, I don't even remember what states weed is illegal now, but whichever state it is, Texas, I don't know, but you'll see that if someone comes to comes to California to get an abortion, people there are activists in places like Texas trying to make it so that those people can get legal consequences for having left Texas to get an abortion. And that kind of stuff really bothers me. At the end of the day, the way that me and a number of other activists are coping with the fact that abortion is illegal in certain states is by helping women in those states get out of those states to get abortions and getting them medicine that's not available in their state anymore. And that's a way that we're doing it, but we're looking at getting having legal charges at us for that, and those women are looking at being targeted for exiting their state and doing whatever the fuck they want on the other side. Sorry, but
Right,
in their state.
I think you did a really good job of highlighting one thing that I think is truly disturbing about the Texas law and some of the other ones that we've seen is that there's a push to not just criminalize abortion, but also to criminalize anybody who might be, say, aiding and abetting an abortion, right? Or however you would like to put it. I think that that's a real attack on civil society, and that's a real attack on people's individual morality, even outside of abortion. But just, should you help people get a ride? Should you give them money if they are struggling and they ask you for money? Should you be able to let someone crash in your living room because they are feeling unwell for whatever reason? There's just a whole lot in there that we're just opening the doors for the state to come in and tell us what we can do on a one-to-one level with other people, where even outside of your personal views on abortion, I think that that's deeply disturbing, just in terms of regulating, freedom of conscience and freedom of association, which is very concerning to me. And of course, there's a whole lot of bigger, big brother state, nanny state powers that are tied with all of those things as well.
And just for the record, I absolutely would object to any kind of attempt to stop people from crossing state lines. I mean, this is not controversial to me at all. Yeah. I don't think that anybody, even people who are pro-life or who maybe even support a more aggressive anti-abortion legal regime than I would be in favor of, should be comfortable with that. They should be uncomfortable with that. But since you raised the issue of sort of freedom of association and conscience rights, I should point out that the flip side of this goes as well. There have been repeated numerous efforts to, for example, use the power of the state to force Catholic hospitals to perform abortions against their will, or to perform other kinds of medical procedures or offer contraceptives, sterilization procedures, transgender therapies, and so on and so forth, trying to use the power of the state to force Catholic hospitals, Catholic doctors, Catholic nurses to be involved in these procedures against their will. And this is, like I said, the ACLU is just filing one lawsuit after another trying to make this happen. So these risks go both ways, and it doesn't actually, whether or not the law is one way or the other in any given state doesn't make, abortion could be perfectly legal all 40 weeks of pregnancy, and you would still have threats to freedom of association and conscience rights.
Yeah, so Slade, I think actually I want to talk a little bit about that Catholic hospital point that you brought up as well, because this is something that's becoming increasingly a part of the conversation. For example, with the only hospital in Durango, Colorado, recently has passed a policy where they no longer do vasectomies, or they passed that a couple of years ago, but now they no longer do sterilizations for women who are already having a C-section, right? And of course, it is their right.
The state government, or the local government said this, or just the hospital has a policy?
No, this is the hospital, but it's the only hospital within 2 or 3 hours drive. So so again, to the local question, of course, like these people could decide, I just don't want to live in Durango, Colorado. That's certainly an option. But if it's the only maternity ward in the area, there is a question there. But again, I think that
No,
they
there's not
do
a
have
question
that
there.
right. They absolutely, no, I mean, but I'm saying people do question it, right? But here's the problem. They absolutely have the right to choose not to offer those services. I do not think that the state should require them to, but the problem is that they're not telling, they're not putting this out there. They're not telling people ahead of time, like here are specifically the services that we will not do, that we do not do these. They do have a writer on their website, if you read their mission, say that they only do things within a Catholic consciousness or things like that. But I think for a lot of people who are signing up to have their births at that hospital or who live in the area, they don't necessarily understand what they are agreeing to up front. There was even questions of doctors in the hospital who didn't realize at the time that they were getting hired, or even until they scheduled a sterilization or something like that, and they're told, no, you can't do that at this hospital. They just didn't realize that they were agreeing to that. So again, I do think it is completely within those hospitals' rights, and I don't think that they should be legally required to do anything like that. But I do think that there needs to be a whole lot more upfront across the board. And it's not just a Catholic hospital question. Many different hospitals, because of the mission of that hospital, have very different practices. And this happens a lot, especially around reproductive rights or around childbirth and things like that. And people just don't know that hospitals are different. They think all hospitals are the same. And so I think that there needs to be, again, that's a matter of public education.
Okay. I think I want to make sure we have some time for audience questions here. So I'm gonna jump in here with one of those, unless anyone really
Good luck. The comments are toxic with some good questions.
We've got one question here right now. So I want to, it says, Kirsten asks, wants to know, how do you think this is affecting birth control policy, e.g. certain types of birth control at risk of being banned, some types of birth control now becoming more accessible to reduce the negative consequences of anti-abortion policies, some people trying to make birth control access harder since they can now force pregnant people to carry pregnancies, etc. So does anyone have any thoughts on how this might affect birth control in the United States?
Well, I think the trend is that birth control is becoming increasingly more accessible because of the tech companies that are emerging online, and people's comfortability with having things mailed to their house instead of going to a physical pharmacy to pick things up. So I think naturally.
Sorry. Yeah, no, like what you're talking about, like tech companies and private industry are, yeah, this is a good capitalism success story.
Yes. So I think access is increasing, whether anybody likes it or not. I think it'll be hard to put that rabbit back in the hat, although, you know, there was the Comstock Act from years ago, which limited obscene materials specifically that would be carried through the U.S. Postal Service. So it's not risk-free, but I'm comforted by the fact that birth control is easier to access than ever, although still not accessible enough, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. I think that it depends on the scope in which you're looking at. Now, I'd also like to point out that when you're talking about birth control, you're only talking about, for the most part, oral contraceptives,
Yes.
which the vast majority of women who use birth control do use. They are semi-effective. They can be very effective if used perfectly in all cases, etc. But, you know, they do fail. A lot of the time they have a 1% failure rate if used perfectly. And in actual case, it's somewhere between 70%. No, I'm sorry, not 70% failure rate, 70% non-failure rate. I don't want to scare people here, but that is just one format. There's a lot of other contraception options out there that may be more or less difficult. There's also, again, when it comes down to freedom of consciousness, I do think that, of course, people, you know, certain businesses or certain individuals should have the right to deny to provide certain services, but that's not always very upfront. And there have been cases, particularly when it comes to things like Plan B, which is basically a much larger dose of those same hormones that people would take within usually a 24 to 48 hour window after a potential birth control problem, in order to prevent an egg from implanting, causing a pregnancy. That's a lot of people in a lot of areas are saying that they're unable to access it or unable to access it within a window because they're getting turned down. And of course, there's just not many options for, depending on, again, on where you live. If you want to get sterilized ahead of time, or if you want male contraceptives, there just aren't very many options in the United States. There are many more options overseas, but they've not been improved within the US. So there's definitely things to worry about there as well. Although I do think that the rise of options for women who do want to get those oral contraceptives is a very positive move. And it's a very positive move that pro-life people, for the most part, should be embracing as well, because it's preventing unwanted pregnancies.
Yeah, Kirsten has a follow-up question. Any concern about IUDs becoming illegal because some people want to classify them as abortion devices? I just want to weigh in here and say, I don't think so. I think that while there will be stray state Republicans calling for things like that, or for all sorts of contraception, bans or limiting it. I mean, I can see that happening maybe, but I don't think that there is much political will amongst mainstream Republicans, especially now in the wake of Roe, because being overturned, because they don't want to, they've been saying all along, no, we want to help prevent unwanted pregnancies. I don't think that suddenly now that we're going to revert as much as, you might hear isolated calls for that.
Yeah, I think political will is a huge part of this, because there are several people who view any forms of birth control whatsoever as abortive fashions. So they would say things like condoms should be outlawed as well, but it's simply not a popular view, and so it's unlikely to get passed.
But two other questions, I'm going to throw them both out here, and if panelists want to answer either of them. Dan Fishman asked, how do you think tech DIY will improve women's access to abortion? And then also we have another question. I've heard from more older libertarians that there was little pro-life libertarian movement until paleocons like Ron Paul started self-identifying as libertarians. Has this been your experience? So I don't know if anyone wants to.
I can hit both of them.
I was thinking those are Avens questions.
Sorry. Well, all right. Okay, wait. The first one was about tech DIY. I mean, right now, what's cool is there's companies like Nurex out there, NURX, that are doing they're currently doing contraception over an app. So literally and I live in California, where it's wicked easy to get birth control because I don't actually need a doctor's prescription to get it here in California. But I actually use the app because it's simpler. So I go on this app on my phone, and I just update them with my details, and then they just send me my birth control. And if I want changes done to it, I can do it. And even though I go to a regular OBGYN and everything, it's pretty rad that I can just fill out an app in the privacy of my own home. And for a couple of years, I didn't end up going into an OBGYN. I just did that and it was just very convenient. But I will say that right now, we are seeing there are websites right now that are dedicated to helping women access the medical abortions. And so if you go to aidaccess.org, that is at AID, aidaccess.org, that actually—
Avens, can I pause you? I think you need to define what medical abortions are to people.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Otherwise that just sounds like abortions.
So medical abortions are abortions done with pills. And so the pill, I suck at pronouncing it's my mifepristone, and it's the two pills. I know exactly what they do. One of them basically prevents stops the flow of hormones into the uterus for supporting the embryonic and fetal growth. And then the second set of pills, you usually actually only need to take the first, because if the hormonal support isn't there, typically your body just naturally starts miscarrying that, which is why this is indistinguishable from a miscarriage when if you go to a doctor's office. But the second pill basically instigates contractions in your body. And both of these pills are actually, they have other medical uses, and both of these pills
I actually had both of them while giving birth to my son because got stuck in labor for 23 hours and then everything stopped progressing. And so they gave me both of those. And obviously I was not trying to abort my son at 42, almost 43 weeks.
So that's the thing is like, it's the same thing with like abortion procedure, by the way, is that all abortion procedures and all abortion medications are also used, some of them used in the birth process and some of them used in the cleaning up after a miscarriage process. And so you can't make those things themselves illegal. You cannot make a DNA illegal or DNC illegal or medical abortion, medical pills illegal, because like you can make them illegal for certain intents, but you can't make them illegal at all, like completely,
You
because
can, but it's going to lead
but
to a whole
you
lot
can,
more
yes,
deaths.
sorry, you can, but yes, you will end up with women who are trying to have a baby, like legit, like, you know, not trying to abort anything and dying in the process. So so it's kind of, it's interesting. And there was prior to Texas making abortion illegal, like Texas actually, I think it was the HB2 law. Actually, there was an interesting thing about the legality of certain of the procedure, depending on if you were using the procedure to clean up after an abortion or to have an abortion or to clean up after a miscarriage. And it was really fascinating. But anyway, so the point is that medical abortions are those, you getting those 2 pills, and you can get those mailed to you. And so, you know, here in California, you can go into a doctor's office and ask for them. In states where it's illegal, like states where it's legal now, there are websites where you can just go in and you can fill out your information. You can say when your last period was, and they will mail you those pills in a couple of days, and they can be used within the first 10 weeks of pregnancy. They're also adding European doctors who will prescribe to women in states where it's illegal as well. And so that's it's an impressive, like there's multiple steps in order to make it accessible, and to like kind of subvert laws. I'm not 100% sure how they're doing it, but I know that I like tested it out by pretending that I was like a woman in Texas, and I was like, I live in Texas, what happens? And they're like, oh, you can have a European doctor can prescribe this to you and they'll mail it to you, but it's going to take like 4 weeks. And so like in that situation, you've got like a 10-week window to take these pills safely. And obviously that process obstructs. So a number of people here in the US, what they're doing is if they live in states where it's perfectly legal, they sign up, they get the abortion pills, the medical abortion pills sent to themselves, and then like in, let's say, California, and then they just overnight them to somebody in Texas, because that can be done really quickly in less than a week. So that is currently how people are getting around these regulations, and that is a tech thing. So I'll let anyone else dive in on that one before I get into the historical abortion stuff.
I think it might just be interesting to note that the medical abortions do have to take place within a certain number of weeks, but the majority of abortions are taking place within 13 weeks anyways. 91% are before 13 weeks. And for people who receive abortions within 8 weeks of the defined period, starting with the first day of your last menstrual cycle, the most common week for people to get an abortion during that time frame is the 6th week. So this does apply to the vast majority of people seeking abortions, which we can understand how that would create a large black market for places that ban and have heavy regulations in place, because it will be easy to access pills.
I think this is just an aside. This is just an aside, but I think the language that we use can be confusing to people who have not actually had children themselves too. So if you, so when we talk about the 6th week in pregnancy, that's generally speaking about 4 weeks from when conception happened, like when the sex happened. The first 2 weeks of pregnancy, you haven't had sex yet, generally speaking. And so that's actually something to think about. So what you're talking about is around the first time that you would potentially miss a period, but not necessarily when it's flagged for people, because not everyone is on a 28-day cycle. It can be much wider. So you may not even know that you're pregnant for many weeks still.
I just want to throw in here, there's two more, we're going to have to end here in a second, but there's two more questions. So I want to throw them in, and then I want to let everyone have a final say if you want to just say any answer to this question, or if you want to comment on anything else inside. Someone says, I think Slade made an excellent point in the intro that libertarians aren't pro-choice on everything, laws against murder, robbery, etc., are pretty uncontroversial. Even so, I hear a lot of, well, prohibition doesn't work, as if that's definitive. That's just as true of laws against murder, robbery, etc. So what laws, banning things are you all okay with? What principles unite those that doesn't fit abortion? And then another question down here about if contraception, if stronger contraception exists, does that create a paradigm where conception is a choice? Patch or implant for a man to denature sperm would eliminate much of the problem. So they wanted to know what you thought of that. So I just wanted to put those two questions out there, and now I just want to go. We're supposed to be ending right now, but if all of our panelists want to have a final comment on any of the questions that were just asked, or on anything in the discussion that you haven't gotten to chime back in on, please do so.
On the first question, I would say the thing that differentiates, even for me, abortion from the other things that I think most people agree, if the state has any role at all, it's to do things like criminalize murder and rape, right? The difference is there is almost universal moral agreement with that on the case of rape and murder and assault and theft, and there's not when it comes to abortion. Our country is divided, the society is divided, public opinion isn't there. That means that we introduce all kinds of potential unintended consequences when we bring the state into the equation. So we have to think harder about it. Just because I think that abortion is an act that is more closely categorized, more correctly categorized with those others, doesn't mean that I necessarily want to see all the laws look the same, like the same way they look for murder or rape or theft.
If I can speak to that as well, I think actually when the fact of the matter is that there isn't consensus on what counts as murder or as rape or things like that. There's a reason that we have ongoing, very hot conversations about what is consent, what is not consent, what should be qualified as rape, what should not be, why we have very different rape laws in every different country and even every different state, right? So I think that people don't agree fundamentally across the board. People don't agree, what counts as murder even, like for some people, things like joining the military would be immoral. For other people, it's actually something to be very proud of. So those are two things that, again, I think that the conversation always comes back to that, but I don't think it's actually as helpful of a thought experiment as people think that it is. And I just want to speak to the contraception question.
Can I jump in real quick on what you just said? Yes. One thing that Catherine Mango-Ward, who's the editor-in-chief of Reason Magazine, often says is that, even if you consider it murder, there are kinds of murder that we think are legal in the United States.
Yes, so exactly.
But like Kat mentioned, like war, self-defense, some places where like euthanasia is. So it's, even if you think that it is murder, then it doesn't necessarily, say that everything, that it just should definitely be illegal. But
that's my point. To be clear, that's the point
closer to my personal opinions on abortion, actually. But I also want to speak to the contraception question quickly. I absolutely think that we need better access to contraception. We need a wider variety, and people need to be able to access it no matter what their age, which I think is also a big problem here, right? But again, I think you can, at a moral level, believe as an individual that you choosing to use contraception means that if you have PIV sex, you are potentially taking on the risk of pregnancy. You have a plan for it. You're going to go through with it. That is the way that I, as a pro-life person, have always approached this question, but I do not think that that's something that the state can get involved in for a number of moral reasons, but also for a number of pragmatic reasons, which include the fact that, people lie, people take it incorrectly, people mislead their partners, and people get raped. And I just don't think that there's a way that you can tie the law so closely to treating contraception as consent.
Yeah, and adding one more thing is that, should we take pregnancies as a public matter or as a private matter? In which moment can we bring the government in the doctor room with the woman? This is a question that, what is the moment when you figure out that you're pregnant that you should ask for someone else's advice? Should I keep it or not? This is, and it's about the enforcement too. Should we really enforce women that don't want to get pregnant and put them in jail? And what is this is something that we try to think in Brazil because we have a large amount of people in jails, and it's a real problem. So do we want to put women that wanted to stop pregnancies in jail? Should we take their freedoms? What is the right enforcement to women that don't want to keep up a pregnancy? This is something that we discuss a lot. Do we really want them in jail? Okay, we can be against the abortion and interrupting a pregnancy, but do we want them in jail? And for how long? For 3 years? For 4 years? And do we want to investigate women that had periods that were late for 1 year? Do we want the public money to be investigating women that had 1 year a late period? So this is the question that we always put place to libertarians that care about the public money that are investing to investigate and to put in jail women that just didn't want to keep a pregnancy.
Avens or Marianne, do you guys have any final comments here?
Yeah, I think the issue is for relating things like murder to abortion is that the crime scene is somebody's body. And to really do a thorough investigation means some form of access to either medical records or to measurable things within that person's body. So I think that when we send in the police to monitor the situation, it gets really dicey. But I would like to just maybe inject a note of optimism, because nobody likes unintended pregnancies, which often are the ones that result in abortions. And since 2007 to 2016, abortions by their number and their rate have been decreasing, and large decreases we're seeing amongst women aged 15 to 19. 2016, women aged 15 to 19 saw an abortion rate decrease by 56%. These women are going to continue to age, and if they already have a lower propensity to have abortions and unintended pregnancies, then that's great. I think the best we can hope for is just to outgrow this situation, because it's, to my mind, insoluble. So we can just hope to be better educated, have better access to contraceptives, and have more contraceptives, because IUDs, hormonal birth control, and condoms aren't enough. So I'm optimistic.
I guess I would add on to some of Kat, Liz's, and Slade's comments about the fact that, like, we don't have actually a universal agreement on what is murder, and we have exceptions to what we consider murder to be or what we consider rape to be, and that's things like not just like military or whatever else, but we also like self-defense is one. Right. And so, from a fundamental point, I also see I see abortion as, it's a fundamental determination of your own destiny and deciding I don't want to have this baby, but the other factor for me is that pregnancy and birth can be life-threatening and can result in irreparable damage to a woman's body. Now, it might not, but when someone finds out they're pregnant, they're facing down a lot of different possibilities, from preeclampsia to uterine prolapse to, gestational diabetes, to things that, like, health issues that may continue for the rest of their lives. I was my mother's last child, and and she had a lot of health issues after giving birth to me. And so this is like a fundamental self-determination, not just about deciding whether or not to be a parent, but deciding to put your body under tremendous amounts of stress, because you're literally creating another human being. And for me, like, I consider abortion in some ways to be an act of that fundamental, like, self-defensive body, because I get to decide when and if my body is going to undergo that particular level of stress and change that could work out perfectly fine, or could end up with irreparable, like, harm to me, up to and including death. And it's a scary proposition for some people when they look at that. Like, some people just go, you know what, I'm having a baby and I don't, I'll, whatever I have to give up to bring this baby into the world, that's fine. I like, that's such an incredible selfless thing, but that's not how everybody looks at it. And so it's one of those things.
I don't think people have to look at it that way. Like, I've always been very strongly anti-abortion personally, and being pregnant and going through childbirth and having my son, the entire time, all I kept what kept coming back to me is that, like, this whole process wasn't bad and I enjoyed it because this child was so deeply wanted. But if this was a child that I didn't want, that, you know, maybe I faced a very violent and difficult situation causing this, and
Right.
you know, I still had to deal with all of the related problems, all of the, you know, the time you have to take off of work, all of the like long-term issues, because there are changes to your body for the rest of your life. Everybody, there's not, no one misses the changes. Like they're fundamentally, you are a different person for the entire rest of your life. And so I think that actually made me a lot more sympathetic to abortion itself.
Good.
Oh, no, sorry, go on.
No, I've talked enough and I know you need to close this up, but if anyone who's in the comments wants to know more about the history of abortion rights in the Libertarian Party, like, you can follow me on Facebook and I'll tell you about that. Because like in the Libertarian movement, it was very much, I know this was a question a while back, but I just wanted to hit it real quick, which is that abortion rights in the history of the LP, there's always been a small contingent in the libertarian movement that has been pro-life. And that pro-life also is sometimes not, like, it is still opposed to government intervention, and some of it isn't, which is why these words don't really work well for us all. But it was fairly non-controversial in the libertarian sphere for many years to be pro-choice, and the pro-life kind of like bubbling up of things is a more recent phenomenon in the last 20 to 30 years. And Ron Paul is one of those, because Ron Paul had a big impact on not just on the liberty movement more recently, but he was the LP's candidate in '88, and he was pro-life. And the LP actually had a huge internal fight about that and asked him not to make any comments about abortion, which he didn't at the time. That was actually an agreement. He agreed not to talk about abortion in his 1988 presidential campaign because he knew his views didn't align with the majority of libertarians, and he was doing that as a favor to us. And so it's an interesting thing, like, historically, to see that, like, libertarians have always been extremely skeptical of using government to enforce particular, like, moral preferences, and abortion isn't an exception to that. But we have seen kind of an interesting conversation bubble up more recently that wasn't like that before.
If any of the panelists want to please drop like where people can find you on social media or into the chat right now, that would be great. I'm dropping in some of Feminists for Liberty's channels. We're on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. We also have a Substack, which is just feministsforliberty.substack.com. So if you sign up for our newsletter, we promise not to spam you. We actually have a hard time remembering to send out email newsletters in general, but we're trying to get better at that. We're trying to send about probably one a month or maybe two a month if it comes for a reminder about events. So if you sign up for our newsletter, we'll let you know when we're doing future panels. We've got some great panels, like the same sort of virtual panels coming up later this year. We are also launching a book club, the first one of which is going to focus on Joan Kennedy Taylor. She's the founder of the Association of Libertarian Feminists. Her 1992 book, Reclaiming the Mainstream, Individualist Feminism Rediscovered. It's going to be our first selection. Our book club is going to start in March. So we're really excited about that. So you can find more information about that on our website, feministsforliberty.com, or through our newsletter. And like I said, I dropped all of our social handles into the chat. So please check us out there. I just want to say thank you so much to our panelists. This has been just such an interesting and nuanced and respectful discussion about a very hard topic. And I'm so glad that we could have you all as part of this and have your perspectives. It's been really wonderful. And I've been, reading people, the audience members over in the chats, and there's been some good discussion about this once we got the jackasses out of the chat. So sorry about that, but thank you so much for everyone for bearing with us, and thank you all for being a part of this tonight and asking such interesting questions. And that's it. Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks, everybody.